All right, YouTube, there's very important breaking news right now. There are two links in the description. One is to the Washington Post and one is to Real Clear Politics. This is about Glenn Greenwald and Snowden and the data that was lifted from the National Security Agency. Um, Glenn Greenwald to publish list of U.S. citizens that NSA spied on. Now, we're not sure if this is going to be a complete list, as in probably hundreds of thousands or millions of people. One person said 2 million individuals. However, that was actually in reference to the files that Snowden actually obtained. It may be a similar number, however, for people who are being spied on. It could be more than that. There's no way to know, but here are some thoughts that I had almost immediately upon reading this story. I was on 4chan and saw this. I was like, what? I went to the story and I was actually surprised that this was data that he had gotten his hands on. This could be an extremely damning story, damning revelation when it's finally released to the NSA and to the U.S. government itself. And he's making a promise to do the same, essentially, for the British intelligence agencies, too. Some thoughts popped into my mind right away. The first was, if any of the people on these surveillance lists are senators, congressmen, anyone from essentially the entire legislative or judicial branch of the United States government, or under their jurisdiction, sort of. If any of those people turn out to be on the list, that breaks the separation of powers because the NSA is under military jurisdiction and thus under the executive branch. That, I believe, would fall under the term impeachable offense because obviously this was going on with the knowledge of the president. Another thing I thought of, what if some of the people that are named here turn out to be, the heads or representatives or associated with groups like the ACLU, the Libertarian Party, the Progressive Caucus, essentially any of the political or religious or social forces that are sort of outside of the mainstream or try to keep the mainstream politicians in check. That would be disastrous for Obama's PR. It would be disastrous for the Republicans equally, too, because a lot of the McCains and Boehners of the world really don't seem to have a problem with the NSA either and have largely ignored the issue. They came out and said, well, that's regrettable, well, we should look into it, and then silence. Another thing is, this may not be like former leaks. Here's my theory. When the other NSA-related leaks happened, we knew Obama was lying because he was caught out over and over doing it. We knew Carney was lying. We knew McCain was lying. We knew all the Congress people were lying to the American public. And the British government's lying to the British, and all the other governments that are involved in this data mining are all culpable for this material, this thing that's happening. But most people took up the line of, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I'm sure they're not spying on me, because we didn't know who was being spied on. So there were no actual names. Nobody said, well, I know that person, or hey, that's my relative, that's my friend's mom, oh my God, that's me. Nobody saw their name or any name they were familiar with. It's easy to trample on people's rights when there are no names being named. Because it's just this general sense of, well, they're conducting surveillance, but nobody I know could possibly be on this list. I couldn't be on it. My boss couldn't be on it, or the congressman that represents my district couldn't be on this list. However, when he begins to put these names out, and especially if he publishes the full list, which must run well into the thousands of people that must be on this list to justify such a program existing, when those names are named, people will begin, I think, to wake up a little bit more, because up until now, there's been no sense of an actual person that's suffering as the result of this. And the courts, too, are involved, because several groups and individuals tried to submit lawsuits to stop some of the more rampant parts of the NSA spying. The courts told them they couldn't bring a case because they themselves couldn't make a claim. They couldn't prove that they were targeted by any sort of surveillance. However, if a list is published showing clearly from the NSA's own internal documents that these individuals are actually being spied on, then they can make that legal claim. they can actually put it before a court, potentially the Supreme Court, and argue that it violates their constitutional rights, that it violates specifically their right to privacy, possibly their right to expression, depending on if any action was taken after this surveillance, because we don't know if the surveillance stops at merely listening in and just ends there and doesn't go to real world activity. That could be in a future leak for all we know. But this will free up the ability of at least the people named on these lists to actually make a claim against the NSA, either to stop it or to seek essentially reimbursement for damages because their rights were violated. That would be the best case scenario. Would be the NSA is capable of settling out of court in a class action lawsuit. I don't think they would be able to do that, though, because that could run into the criminal as well. It could be outright treasonous if any senators or congressmen are on this list. That violates the separation of powers quite clearly because of the people who have jurisdiction over the NSA's activities. The military. It's an extension of, subservient to, the executive branch. Quite clearly, you couldn't send the military to go spy on Congress. So why would you be able to send an arm of the military, essentially, that's directly operating at their behest to do the same thing? You can't. It's unconstitutional. My hope is that this leak comes out pretty damn soon. He should be redoubling his efforts, have aides helping him do this, or whatever. And he should get these names out as soon as possible. I have a feeling, though, that he's going to wait a few months. And here's why. I think he's waiting till it's closer to the midterms. Because I think he wants to cause people no longer to trust the Republican and Democratic parties. Well, I stopped trusting them years ago. A lot of people did. In fact, their trust level is at an all-time low. But it hasn't gotten to the point yet where they're willing to flock to a more reasonable third party or support an independent candidate for president or Congress or whatever. It hasn't manifested so far. There could, though, be senators and congressmen on this list, or governors, military generals, corporate CEOs. This probably is not limited to just, regular average Joes. Even if it is, that will have a shocking effect on the entire population because they will say, I'm familiar with this person from Facebook. I'm familiar with this person from Twitter. I know that person, he lives down the street from me. Well, that's my second cousin. And it will have a shocking effect because soon a lot of people will either know somebody who's been, had this surveillance conducted on them, or their friend knows somebody or something else, some permutation of this same idea, and pretty soon there will be a face to the victimhood of being spied on. And the face will probably look like the average Joe, who's the last person you would ever think would be involved in a terrorist ring. This could be just simply people who, some sultan out in Egypt or something accidentally pocket dialed them internationally, if that's possible, on, the cell phones that they use over there. You get pocket dialed by Osama bin Laden and all of a sudden you're considered a possible terrorist operative. And they're never going to stop spying on you because they're always going to be worried that you'll blow something up. And to tell the truth, if this list is quite long, if it's, more than a few thousand people, I would think it would come off as strange to people to think that a large proportion of the population are considered potential terrorists, because we've all been told that the only purpose of the NSA metadata mining and listening into phone calls and going through people's emails and their search histories and hacking their computers and hacking every piece of software that crosses through the Western world and tying it in with spying in a dozen other countries, we've been told it's to keep us safe from terrorists. That's what we've been told. Now, obviously, that's not the case. Obviously, this goes far beyond that and is now in the realm of dystopia. But there are still a lot of gullible, easily led people who are willing to just smile through it and assume that the government's not lying to me. I'm sure that it's just to stop Abdullah down the road from blowing himself up in his curry shop. However, I think that after this release, it'll become clear that there are completely average people, soccer moms living with a white picket fence who have never even committed any crime, except for, the pot they smoked in college, that are on these lists. Or political representatives, activists. What would happen if it turns out that, the entire staff of the New York Times is on some sort of data mining list. Obama's going to get browbeaten into the corner by even the media at that point. Imagine if the media heads are on here, or stars in Hollywood, traditionally, sort of Democrat-friendly groups. Obama's not going to hear the end of it, because ultimately the responsibility lies with him as the commander-in-chief of the military, overseeing a surveillance operation that is tied in with the military. It is his fault if the Constitution is being breached through the NSA's actions. It's not even Clapper's fault. It's Obama's fault. Because the buck stops there. Just as when Bush did similar things, people called for his head. They didn't care about the heads of these agencies, other than a few, other than John Ashcroft and Dick Cheney. They blamed Bush because he's the head of the party, at the time, the figurehead anyway. He's the head of the executive branch. He's the one that's supposed to take responsibility. Now, I'd go further. I would say there are dozens of people, at least in the Senate and House, that are equally responsible. There are also dozens of bureaucratic heads and probably lots of staffers and advisors and generals and all sorts of people that are responsible for this. But the first person that you would think of that you would want to resign if it turns out the Constitution's being grievously breached is the president. And probably the vice president, too, would have to step down, or he would be impeached. I think that would be good. I'm hoping Greenwald, if he waits very long, is simply going to release it a couple months before the midterms, really let it sink in and really let it demolish a lot of people who were in support of the NSA. I've said it before, the NSA is far larger than people expect. We've been lied to repeatedly. This is good news, because it means hopefully there will finally be some level of accountability for something that never should have been considered by any American to be acceptable to conduct on American soil towards American citizens. It makes no sense. It's not helpful. It's not stopping terrorist attacks. It didn't stop Tsarnaev. It didn't stop this Rogers kid. It's not going to stop any attacks. And it hasn't stopped any attacks. If it has, let them name the attacks that it has stopped. People have asked them this over and over. They've named absolutely nothing that has been accomplished by the NSA except pissing off people in allied countries, pissing off their heads of state, and really making the United States look a hell of a lot more dystopian than it even did under Bush of all people. It's sad. It needs to stop. Hopefully this will cause that. Hopefully there will finally be some level of accountability. That's about all. Peace out.